why is it when somebody criticizes socialism, perhaps by pointing out the abysmal record of the Soviet Union on everything from civil liberties to economic conditions to the gulags, you are almost bound to have someone enter the chat and confidently exclaim, "You idiot! That was communism, not socialism," which is a somewhat fascinating claim, as the USSR did stand for the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. But then again, simply because someone claims something about themselves or their country doesn't mean that they actually are that thing. I mean, after all, the Democratic Republic of South Korea is not really democratic or a republic. So just to try to settle this, how about we go straight to Karl Marx himself to see what the potential differences might have been between communism and socialism? Well, according to the Oxford Handbook of Karl Marx, Marx used many terms to refer to a post-capitalist society: positive humanism, socialism, communism, realm of free individuality, free association of producers, etc., etc. He used these terms completely interchangeably. The notion that socialism and communism are distinct historical stages is alien to his work and only entered the lexicon of Marxism after his death. So where do we start to begin this distinction between socialism and communism? Well, according to David Steele, it was in 1888. Marxists employed socialism in place of communism, as the latter had come to be considered an old-fashioned synonym for socialism. It was not until after the Bolshevik Revolution that socialism was appropriated by Vladimir Lenin to mean a stage between capitalism and communism. Okay, but why would he do that? I mean, what was the purpose of manufacturing a distinction between socialism and communism if they were already supposed to be so different? Again, according to Steele, it was because he used it to defend the Bolshevik program from Marxist criticism that Russia's productive forces were not sufficiently developed for communism. And now we've got to explain some more things here, because that doesn't seem to make sense. Why would the term socialism be redefined as a stage between capitalism and communism for the purpose of defending communism? And maybe it had something to do with this, because what Marx envisioned was a kind of classless utopia, a dictatorship of the proletariat, where the means of production and really all private property of any significance was owned in common. This did not just mean the destruction of the capitalist system. It meant the destruction of religion, the traditional family, and even the concept of government itself as we know it. But remember how Marx not only used socialism interchangeably with communism, but also the term post-capitalist, because Marxist theory posited that communism would happen as a result of what he believed to be the internal inconsistencies and contradictions of capitalism. It was only then that the workers of the world would unite, seize the means of production, and eventually usher in said communist end states. The problem was, Tsarist Russia wasn't exactly a model of what Marx would have considered to be late-stage capitalism. It was more feudal than the capitalist environment Marx thought would be ripe for revolution. This meant that if Lenin attempted to usher in the dictatorship of the proletariat without the corresponding government authority and power necessary to manage the revolution, things probably weren't going to work out well. By redefining socialism, he was creating a kind of intermediate stage whereby the vanguard of the revolution, which was essentially small groups of Bolsheviks dedicated as true believers, would be the ones to seize the power and run things for a time, just until the workers of the world were ready to live in, real communism, the kind that actually doesn't have any government. So you see how that works? We essentially have two definitions of socialism that we're working with. The first is simply the abolition of private ownership of the means of production and the common ownership of all property by the people. So essentially, the same fundamental objective as communism. That's the reason why the terms were so often used interchangeably. Or we have this other definition of socialism, which also means the abolition of the private ownership of the means of production and the common ownership of all property by the state, who are, of course, serving as the representative of the people, just until they're ready to run everything without the state, which never seems to happen. So here's the question. When somebody attempts to defend themselves by saying, oh, no, I'm not a communist, I'm a socialist, the question is, what's the difference? Because in practical terms, there really isn't any. They both have horrific track records with no real distinction in practice and with body counts that would make Genghis Khan blush. But at least in theory, communism one day ends in a mythical wonderland of abundance where government coercion is no longer necessary because everything is owned and operated and enjoyed by the people. Socialists, on the other hand, and maybe even to their credit, don't buy that such an end state is ever possible. So they leave us with a system where government control and ultimately totalitarianism is necessary because they have to be able to centrally manage the economy. And since the economy is really nothing more than human beings engaging in transactions, that means in order to centrally plan and control the economy, you have to centrally plan and control people. And under socialism, that's as good as it's ever going to get. Socialism is ultimately communism, but with no fake utopia at the end to even dream of. So the next time somebody tells you, no, I'm not a communist, I'm a socialist, just look back at them and be like, oh, so something even worse.